fog clung to the twisting roads of Northern California like a shroud, curling around the tires of Thomas Meehan's car as he sped southward from Eureka on that fateful February afternoon in 1963. The air was heavy, the sky a bruised smear of grey, and the 38-year-old attorney from Concord felt a sickness creeping into his bones. An ache that wasn't just fatigue. At Myers Flat, he pulled over, the hum of the engine falling silent as he fumbled with a payphone. His voice rasped through the line to his wife. "I don't feel right. I'm ill." Her reply was firm, practical. "Stay the night. Don't push through." He agreed, or so it seemed. But the thread of his story was already unraveling into something far stranger. By 5 o'clock p.m., the dim glow of the 40 Winks motel in Redway flickered into view. Meehan checked in, his hands trembling slightly as he signed the register. The clerk barely glanced up, oblivious to the shadow that seemed to cling to the man. A shadow that didn't quite match the weak light of the motel's neon sign. An hour later, he was gone again, driving through the thickening dusk to the Southern Humboldt Community Hospital in Garberville. There, at 6:45 p.m., he slumped into a chair in the waiting room, his face pale as ash. The nurse, scribbling his details, paused when he muttered, "I feel like I'm dead." She looked up, startled. But before she could summon a doctor, he was gone. Vanished from the chair, as if the air itself had swallowed him. Outside, the night pressed in, cold and watchful. At 7 p.m., a couple driving along Highway 101 glimpsed something unnatural. Crimson taillights veering wildly, then plunging into the black, churning waters of the Eel River. The skid marks clawed at the asphalt, a desperate plea etched into the earth. Yet, impossibly, at 8:00 p.m., Meehan stood in the motel lobby once more, his shoes caked with mud, his trouser cuffs dripping with river water. Chip Nunamaker, the motel's owner, frowned as the attorney leaned close, his breath faintly sour. "Do I look dead to you?" Meehan asked, his voice a hollow echo. "I feel like I've died, and the world died with me." Over and over he repeated it, his eyes glassy, unblinking, as if searching for an answer in Nunamaker's uneasy silence. For an hour they spoke, or rather Meehan spoke, and Nunamaker listened, pinned by the weight of those words. By 9:00 p.m., Meehan retreated to his room, the door clicking shut like a coffin lid. Half an hour later, Harry Young, a motel employee, knocked to deliver bad news. A storm had severed the phone lines. Meehan's call to his wife couldn't go through. The attorney opened the door, and Young froze. Meehan stood there transformed. His muddy clothes replaced by a crisp black suit and a white tie, stark against the gloom. He said nothing, only nodded. His face a mask of waxen stillness. Young backed away, the hallway suddenly too narrow, too cold. At 10:45 p.m., the highway patrol found Meehan's car submerged in the Eel River, its taillights glowing faintly beneath the surface like the eyes of something drowned but restless. Blood streaked the roof, dark and fresh, and the right front window gaped open. Footprints, muddy and faltering, staggered up the bank for 30 feet, then stopped, as if the man they belonged to had been plucked into the void. Droplets of blood glistened in the beam of their flashlights. A trail to nowhere. For 19 days, the river kept its secret. Then, on February the 20th, Meehan's body washed ashore 16 miles downstream, near Myers Flat. The coroner's knife revealed a superficial gash on his head, a wound from the crash. But the water in his lungs told the final tale. He had drowned, hours or days after escaping the wreck. Yet the question lingered, sharp as a winter wind. How had he been in so many places, so many moments, when time itself refused to hold him? That night, the Eel River had claimed him at 7 p.m, or so the skid marks swore. Yet he'd sat in a hospital at 6:45, whispering of death, and stood in a motel at 800 cards, his wet shoes leaving smears on the floor. Nunamaker had seen him, spoken to him, felt the chill of his presence. Young had watched him don a funeral suit, as if dressing for his own end. Had they glimpsed a man already gone, a spectre stitched together by will or delusion? Or had Meehan, in his fevered confusion, slipped through the cracks of reality itself, appearing and vanishing, a shadow cast by a light that no longer burned? Perhaps he'd clawed his way from the river, hitched a ride back to the motel, and said nothing of the crash, his mind too fractured to confess. Perhaps, after Young left him, he wandered into the night, drawn back to the river's pool, to sink at last into its depths. Or perhaps the truth was darker still, that Thomas Meehan had died the moment his car struck the water, and what lingered after, the man who felt dead, who asked if he looked it, was no man at all, but an echo, a ripple in the fabric of a world that didn't notice he was gone. The 40 Winks Motel still stands, they say, though its lights flicker less often now, and on stormy nights, when the Eel River swells and the fog coils tight, some claim to see a figure in a black suit standing at the water's edge, motionless, waiting, asking the darkness if he looks dead.